Nice. Before I start my speech, hi, I'm Neil. All pronouns are he, him. With my elected panel. Start my speech in three, two, one. Let's just be very clear here. This is not a motion about wide sweeping reforms and saving Hong Kong as an individual judge. This is not a fairy tale motion. This is a motion about your survival, your family's survival, and the survival of your other loved ones, and your personal safety as a foreign judge. A few pieces of context to set up this debate. One, what does our counterfactual look like? We think that yes, you resign and you go back to your home country and you work as a judge there. You work as a judge there. Like for example, common law. And like oftentimes like the foreign judges practice common law. There's often Commonwealth countries such as the UK or Australia that you will go back to. So you're likely not to lose reputation as a judge because one, you were already likely a top judge in your home Commonwealth country, because if you weren't, you wouldn't have been appointed by the Hong Kong government. But the second is that the vast majority of people, like especially those in government or in courts, understand that it is something out of your control and that we're just looking out for your own and your family's life. So it is easy to justify given China was literally cracking down on anyone who is marginally liberal in its government. So it's also likely that someone else is likely to take your place, another foreign judge from the Commonwealth, and I'll explain why this is important later. Second piece of context, what then is this debate about? We think that this is a general actor motion, so we're just going to talk about your personal interests as a judge. We think there are two major categories of interest that you have. We think that one, you have selfish interest. So you're likely old-ish. You have a family who also lives in Hong Kong, so as is the case with a lot of foreign CFA judges or workers who bring their families to their country of work. But the second is your non-selfish or altruistic interest. So let's assume the best case on neg, where you are a relatively progressive and altruistic judge. So you want some sort of positive change to occur to Hong Kong or to people in general. We think there's an auxiliary interest, and that safety is the prerequisite interest, but they're going to prove that you're going to fulfill all those interests better on our side of the house anyway. So yeah, two major arguments in the speech. The first thing I'll be doing is talking about safety. The importance of this is quite simple because this is your utmost priority to you as a human being. So if you can prove that the likelihood of you being safe is more on our side of the house, this you not dying or getting intimidated by the Chinese government, we already win. A few layers behind this. So first is, what is the nature of your work as a foreign CFA judge? We think that often what common law, like the type of law that you practice, what common law dictates is a far more liberal approach to adjudication than what the Chinese government is likely to want. Things like the freedom to protest, the freedom of speech, and the avoidance of censorship. And presumably, the CFA brought you there a few years ago because they have an incentive to protect Hong Kong citizens or to increase the amount of human rights that we give to Hong Kong citizens. So the nature of your work is one, likely to be one in which you try to influence court decisions in favor of more liberal outcomes, like things like pardoning protesters, allowing freedom of speech and loosening the restrictions on censorship, and also lessening punishments on the freedom of expression. But note that crucially, this means great friction with China and the Chinese government, because China is definitely against those things, as you can see with the national security law, where they essentially branded protesters as rebels. They jail their protesters no matter what. They censor lots of things on social media. So you have public scrutiny, continuous headlines put on you because every law you interpret, every case that you adjudicate is crucial to setting precedents in Hong Kong. But the second layer then is, why then does that harm your safety? Because one, let's talk about the Chinese government. They can do things that they already do in status quo, like send thugs. In China, they already send thugs to intimidate foreigners. So they cannot just say that just because you're a foreigner, you are protected, when you can already see that that line has already been irreversibly crossed. They have the addresses of everyone you love in Hong Kong, so they can threaten or stalk them too. Even just knowing that the Chinese government knows where you live, knows where your children go to school, knows where your spouse lives, is incredibly damaging to your mental state. But the second layer here is that the Chinese loyalists in Hong Kong, they will see you as the Western imposition of laws in our mainland China. You are heckled on the streets. Your children are threatened. They will do everything in their power to make your life in Hong Kong a living hell. This is the reality of being anyone regardless of power. It's status quo. This looks like Joshua Wong, literally the leader of the opposition movement in Hong Kong, is jailed, attacked, threatened. Note that Joshua Wong has an incredible amount of media attention. In the West, he would be untouchable. But in Hong Kong, those rules do not apply. You are likely to have the same amount of threats put onto you as a judge who has a liberal imposition, as people from mainland Hong Kong would say. What this means is that one, historical precedents, but two, i.e., no matter how much power that you have, the CCP will be out against you. So, but the third is that niggas would say that you have protections. I would claim that you have like relatively no diplomatic immunity or the lines are blurred. Oftentimes, diplomatic immunity is reserved for government officials, but you're just a consultant of the Hong Kong government, right? You're not a permanent judge. Often in real life, consultants are blurred as to whether or not they have diplomatic immunity anyway. But even if you have protections, one, the Chinese government is infinitely more powerful than you, and they could probably cross a few lines and get away with it. But two, these protections are often not enough. They're just your mental state. So wait, oops. My dog died. I was at 5 minutes, 5 seconds. Okay. So sorry. My dog kind of died. It just refreshed now. So I was at 5:05. 3, 2, 1. So often these protections are often to your mental state. So they cannot take into account the emotional intimidation that you go through. So even if you're physically safe, you emotionally do not feel so, like mentally do not feel so, you always feel like you're always on the brink of like feeling like your family's going to be taken from you or something like that. So the comparative of backlash in your home country. So maybe we can take neg on their best case. Maybe they will say that you are going to be ridiculed. But one, this is often short term. There might be a few headlines about you as liberal, like relatively democratic liberal headlines do. But after the initial 2-week news cycle, you are likely to be forgotten about. Second, there are specific protections because you are more proximate to your home country, so those protections are stronger. So on weighing, this is far more preferable than having to continually lose sleep because you are concerned about the repercussions of whatever decision you make if you stay on the panel. There are a few important, crucial impacts in this to this argument. One, your baseline safety, the proximate benefit to be had, like which is the most proximate benefit to be had. Like when you live your day-to-day life, you don't always think about how to hedge against Chinese influence, but you do think about how you survive when you go out to or make a decision. But a second is fear. You're likely to fear for your life and for the lives of your family if you do not resign. And this is very generous. At next best case, if they prove the harms are unlikely, one is that you fear that they will, and that comes prior to appreciating any of their benefits. So if you do have protections, like your family won't get kidnapped, it's a fear of the thinking maybe they might get kidnapped. So this perpetual feeling of fear will affect the way that you perform on the panel, like your mental disposition or their subjective adjudication. Like those feelings just bleed into how you review cases. So on their side, they make you deeply terrified or unhappy as a result. On our side, our baseline is feeling safety, which is the prerequisite of appreciating any of our impacts. At the very least, we're able to prove that you make better decisions on affirmative. Second argument, why even if you do stay, the impact of an individual judge is minimal. So this takes care of the altruistic interest of the judge, which proves the marginal benefit. So why then is helping Hong Kong futile on neg? Because one, the other foreign Commonwealth judges have already left, which means less power in deciding more favorable rulings for protesters. But second, regardless, there's no assured final say. You're just one out of the panel of other judges. But three, the Chinese government could just overturn these rulings if they really are as beneficial as Neg says. Even if everyone on the council agrees on giving rights to protesters, that will not matter if the CCP overturns it as a function of the national security law. So why do you help Hong Kong better on AF? I want to be very clear here. You're likely to have been part of this consultation council years before the Hong Kong protest, so you were signed up when Hong Kong was relatively peaceful. But now that the lives of hundreds of thousands of protesters, the whole Hong Kong populace is on your hands, we think it's something that you realistically cannot have expected when you signed up. So insofar as the Hong Kong government appoints another foreign judge, someone who understands the current state of Hong Kong and is likely to be smarter in terms of like dealing with it, we think that you're able to help Hong Kong more like marginally on our side of the house. Why are you able to have a greater net impact on our homeland? We think you're able to exercise the law freely. There are still people in need in your home country, so being able to help them is already a benefit in and of itself. Impacts are threefold. One, you're not likely to feel guilt because you're at worst you're able to have cognitive dissonance. Like even if you feel guilt, it's the fact that you're able to focus on the fact that you're still helping people. Second, you're able to make an impact on your homeland, you still help people. But third, fear makes you not make laws or adjudicate properly anyway. Like I didn't sign up for the shit kind of stuff. If you want safety, vote for AF. If you want progress, also vote for AF. For all these and more, proud to propose.
All right. Hi, my name is David. My pronouns are he and they. Also, hello again to this team. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. I think the majority of the material you hear from the negative speech is very presumptive of an underestimation of what China is. Because this is not the same as any other kind of political pressure you would face in America or Australia or in the UK. This is not the same amount of backlash you would get in Australia, America, or the UK. We are talking about the greatest censorer in human history, where even the greatest economies of the world are terrified, where in political pressure, even the greatest opposition leader in Hong Kong, Joshua Wong, is still up to this day facing time in prison despite his status, despite his riches. So hell, anyone would be scared if they are fighting literally China, right? As a body, as a power, as a hegemon. So if they want to claim that you lose reputation and they want to claim that you are going to be safe, then they are very welcome to argue this coming from the second, third, and reply. But it's obvious coming from the first speech that we're already winning. Three things in my speech. Firstly, on the framing, and then clarifying the thing on reputation. Secondly, on your impact as a judge, and this is going to destroy all of the material we hear coming from the previous speaker. And then lastly, on safety and why their lack of response is damning. Firstly, on framing, I'd like to note, first of all, so I just like to point out, for the rest of the debate, they agree with the premise that you are practicing common law. You are probably from a Commonwealth country, which means that you're probably from a more liberal context, so like Australia, UK, whatever, judging from the info slide. Secondly, you are unlikely to lose reputation. And I just like to point out that their argument on losing reputation is just kind of very unresponsive to what the status of this person is and what the status of the context is, right? Because firstly, you're a top judge. So it is unclear to me why you're going to lose the reputation in your country when literally the premise of you going to Hong Kong is that you are the first ranked judge in literally your whole entire nation, right? You have spent years being a judge in your home country. You still practice common law in Hong Kong. Your home country also practices common law. So it's not like you're learning a new set of laws from the ground up as they want to assert. If anything, you can have a higher standing in the courts because you know how bad democracy can backslide and you can be an expert in upholding your democracy. I think that you this is just a flip, right? You're actually likely to be even higher of reputation or demand on our side of the house in your home country because of your new experience. The fact that you know how Hong Kong was like, the fact that you know how another country entirely operates. So there are still cases in your home country. There's still ways for you to implement this new information, and obviously the lawmakers in your land are probably going to want this new information as well. So if you want to talk about you losing reputation, I think it's either symmetric at worst, but obviously we prove why it's better under our side of the house. But also it's just easy to justify, right? Like the average citizen in a Commonwealth nation knows how bad China is. Like the average informed citizen, which I'm sure the panel is today, knows that China is very fucking terrible and knows the kinds of things that they do to the protesters in Hong Kong. So obviously anyone would crack down under that pressure. It is unclear as to why people are suddenly going to take the moral high ground in that sense. Secondly, then, your impact as a judge. So their broad claim here is you feel so bad when you leave your progress. And this is essentially what we preempt with guilt, right? Coming from the first speech. Our first speaker says that at worst, even if you leave your progress, even if you feel that you have let down the people of Hong Kong, you have cognitive dissonance. That is, you can lie to yourself at night because you can say, at least I'm actually helping people here, or the fact that you can see the help you're actually doing and working here. Versus on their side of the house, when you try to make these decisions in courts, when they keep getting overturned by China, when you have no support under their side of the house because all of the other foreign judges have left. So that describes the harm. But you know what? I think that's very charitable because I think I have two more responses to defeat this claim entirely and just delete this from the debate. One, we think you feel more guilt on negative because you know that you are unable to do anything about what's happening in front of you. The fact that you know that China is going to overturn the decisions. The fact that you know that your power as a judge is very small because because so many other foreign judges have left. Or just the fact that you're unable to feel solvency of it because you are in literal fear. So the guilt is worse on negative versus on our side, even if maybe the cases are smaller, it is the fact that you can see that you help this poor person. You see that you help this vulnerable child, and therefore you're able to feel that guilt washed away. Secondly, because of the reasons we explained, you're unlikely to feel guilt if you leave, which is, look at their premise, right? Their assertion is you can make an impact on Hong Kong. And this obviously cannot fly because if they want to claim that you feel bad about losing progress, then they first have to respond to what we say, which is, first of all, you are unable to make any meaningful action in Hong Kong on negative side because the other judges have left, so your power is less. Even if you have the same power, it is a fact that you still are unsure if these decisions are going to work. But even if decisions are going to work, it is factor getting overturned by China. So negative proves the incentive, which is you want to keep your legacy, but note the fact that they avoid to what negative first affirmative said, which is China can overturn whatever decision you make. There's obviously precedents for this. They passed the security law already, so they probably are able to do this to a wider scale in the future on their side of the house. So you do not have the capacity. Whereas at least on our side of the house, the person who replaces you is likely to be smarter because they signed up knowing how bad the situation in Hong Kong is, versus on your tenure on the negative side of the house, you entered not knowing that the security law is going to be passed. You entered not knowing that China will overturn all of your decisions, and therefore you feel the shock. You don't know how to prepare for this. At the very least, you know that the person who replaces you is likely to know the kind of circumstances that are going to be in. So maybe they have greater capacity to China and they can uphold their progressive legacy. So on that mechanism alone, we think that your ability to help Hong Kong is probably better on our side of the house when you have someone who replaces you is probably more knowledgeable of the circumstances, has a clearer head going into there, and therefore you have a lot greater impact on your homeland as a result. Secondly, because you're more experienced in matters surrounding democracy and you can adjudicate these things, right? You can prevent democratic backsliding in your Commonwealth country like the UK or Australia, which is less likely to intimidate you the same way China does. And this is the way, right? If they say you can do small things like improving rights, we prove that whatever actually significant law you want to pass will not get passed, right? So whatever they pass on their side is likely insignificant. It's unlikely going to be seen by you and actually seen to have an impact, right? But also, we flip personal fulfillment, right? You feel like whatever you do is insignificant. You feel like you are not useful despite you actually being useful because you face thousands of these cases that you're unable to like actually deal with versus like that 1 or 10 cases that you're able to resolve on the day side of the house. Comparatively, if you go back to your homeland, you feel like you're truly free to help people given the far more liberal freedoms that exist. Lastly then, on safety and why their lack of response is damning. So I just like to say that they just say protection despite the preemption, right? So 1, you actually aren't granted these protections. They just assert that you're protected given the analysis which here coming from Neil, which is just that these are not the same as diplomats, right? Like just empirically, these are not like they aren't granted the same protections, right? In fact, it's probably more akin to like an overseas worker compared to like a diplomat, right? Secondly, even if you have protections, just think about this, right? The protections are limited to your physical safety, but the China is free to keep threatening you and grinding down your mental state. But obviously, like this is very charitable, right? Because the point is, no matter how many protections you have, you are facing China, the same China who will send thugs to you and kill you, the same China who is going to like crack down on you and send you to jail, right? So obviously, no matter how many protections they want to argue, it is the fact that you're facing literally China, the entity that has the most resources in the world, the entity that has control over Hong Kong and its governments and its courts. So obviously the protections are futile. We then say the nature of your work as a top judge from the Commonwealth, as a judge that Hong Kong reached out to help their protesters, is diametrically opposed to China and everything China stands for. So you have things like sending thugs or messages from the Chinese government itself. It's like you have things like loyalists and likely to be threatened by the people that China hijacked. Their response is 1, oh, there's discourse and backlash. 1, it's untrue that there's discourse, right? Because China hijacks the media in Hong Kong, or the people who want to have discourse are afraid of the same fears that we align, right? That they're afraid of being cracked down on. They're afraid of being jailed. So obviously, given the China security law, they're unlikely to have discourse. But secondly, even if it is true and there's discourse, just China doesn't care about that, right? Because of the amount of power that they have is asymmetric. Secondly, they say you're safe as a foreign judge. Obviously, we disprove this already. So this falls into the weighing of safety, right? So even at their best case, in which they prove that you're actually safe, it is the fact that intimidation is not symmetric, right? It's the amount of friction you have with China. It's a manifestation of the intimidation being not existent because you have greater protections in your more liberal country. And therefore, on their side of the house, you fall asleep at night wondering if you're going to die the next day. You fall asleep at night fearing that your family is going to be kidnapped or fearing that your family is going to be hurt. Even if these things don't happen, it's a fact you fear that they're going to happen, and therefore you ought.
And I'd like to welcome the third affirmative speaker to conclude the substantive portion of the affirmative team's case.
Oh, sorry. Am I completely audible and visible?
Yeah.
Okay. She, her pronouns. Okay, starting my speech in 3. Oh, wait, timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, now. Some key responses before I delve into my overarching discussions. So the first layer of response that I want to launch is with disregard of the notion that your family is unlikely to stay with you in Hong Kong. The first thing to say is that even if they don't stay with you, China can probably reach them anywhere. I think that China already has enough resources and enough funds in order for them to have a wide reach whenever they want to set their minds into something. I think that they have money to send people internationally if they are really dead set on doing this kind of agenda. Secondly, even if that's not true, it does not deal with their claim on fear being irrational, that it might not be likely that China has thugged the UK, for example, for stalking your kids. But the fact is that it might happen is already incredibly damaging to your mental state. And I'll expound on this later in my working discussions. The third thing to say is that it's not even just about your kids or your family or whatever relatives that you might possibly have. Because like, sure, maybe on side negative, you can claim that you don't have kids or any kind of like proximate family member living with you. But I think that it still applies to anyone who you care about, your parents, your siblings, your closest friends, your colleagues, or anyone who's from your institution or anyone in your home country that you have managed to form bonds with. I think that this kind of information is not necessarily something that they can't discover for themselves. So it's not necessary, the harm is not necessarily lost. The second thing that I want to launch a response to is with this notion that tensions have always existed, so you know it's risky. First thing to say is that this is uncomparative to the new context that this judge is now currently living with the passing of the national security law, because of this very fact that this already passed and already the context is substantially changed, because you already know that there is a new factor to the equation that could possibly affect the mental calculus that you would have by saying that. And that China is now overturning decisions, that there is even more higher probability of this, setting more historical precedent. So it has to be on extents. They are doing it more and more now. The probability is more and more now. That's why you should be able to make sure that your mental calculus is building on this new context now and not when you first signed up. Second thing to say is that you have less support, because the status quo, other foreign judges already left, so there's less people to hold on to if you do stay on that kind of job. The third thing to say is that sure, at their best, even if you do that, this is something that should possibly or potentially come in, is that you still fear now. Like, fear is irrational. Fear is not something that you can help. So even if you do have the background knowledge or the potential knowledge that, well, this is something that could potentially happen, now that you're living in it, that is something that you have to deal with because it is proximate to you. So it doesn't disprove the first case at all coming from our first speaker. Their extension then, the third thing that I want to respond then is with their extension that, well, China will not screw with Commonwealth countries. But the way that we have to respond to this is that we have to wait on the question on who depends more on who, because Commonwealth countries need the raw materials and manufactured goods from China. Comparatively, China can just export more to the US or other rich non-Commonwealth countries if they want more money. So note the contingency here that you will kill the judge. So like we say that this is not something that you're going to be vindicated of as an individual. So obviously, there is a level of harm that is still existing in this level in this debate. So discussions then. The first discussion that I want to have is, as an individual, what are you more likely to care about? I think then that coming from the side of primitive, we were very clear that we think it is far more important to care about the proximate concerns that you will likely experience given this current context. So this is notably your safety, because you want to protect yourself and your family and other people who are bound to you, that you want to make sure that, you're not necessarily going to go out about these streets and just concerned about whether or not you will live to see the next day. How do we prove this? Because we prove that there is an active Chinese subversion to rights and privacy. This is literally already extensively proven by my constructive speakers, but also that you're going to have a perception of being the Western imposition. So there's also the potential backlash that you will get when you're based in a foreign land that has a lot of these beliefs that align with the CCP. Neg says that, well, intimidation happens everywhere. This is not symmetric for a few reasons. Because number one, the amount of friction that happens is completely different, because that is, we're talking about China, that their goals are entirely revolved around censorship, etc. So this is where the nuance lies in the debate, especially with the passing of the national security law. But even if there is an intimidation on AF, the manifestation of that intimidation is non-existent, because greater protections in a more liberal country by miles exist in the way that is not possible on side negative if you do stay, because the way that states want to censor you and subvert your rights are not at all codified in actual legislation, aka the national security law again. But then Neg says, your country will protect you. Firstly, there's no mechanism that proves this. This is largely asserted coming from them. But you are in a foreign land with no extensive security detail. Notably, you are literally in China, who has an extensive track record of suppressing people who go against the CCP's beliefs. So the way that you can still harm the judge is because Neg does not disprove the immense influence of China on the land that you are currently residing in, but you will only have absolute protection if you are a diplomat, which you are not. The protection afforded to you, if any, is going to be very, very minimal. And they have not proven why this is going to be, something that you would still care about, as opposed to your proximate concerns that you still experience. But then we also prove this by saying that you're going to be much more inclined to have your selfish interests, because naturally you will prefer the option that is safer, aka resigning and going back to your home country. We said that regardless if they're going to be featured in the media, it dies down eventually. But either way, you're still going to be a top judge with a big reputation, with all of these experiences and credentials behind you. But Neg says, well, you will be seen as a spineless judge. But I thought that you were a top judge that your home country selfishly wants to bolster. So I don't understand why you will suddenly be thrown to the wolves of the media. But secondly, China is globally known as a state who is more willing to do a lot of offenses for their own gain. Like, people are not going to be stupid. The more likely scenario is that people are likely to be more empathetic to your plight, because the way that this manifests is that, one, the ability to excuse yourself because the context is unique is obviously present on side affirmative, because A, precedence because other foreign judges also left, so you're not necessarily an isolated case. But B, you show them the things that China is going to do against you, or like you can just show the historical track record that China has already done. So obviously people are not going to be stupid. They're probably going to understand you. But even if there is media backlash, that's more preferable than literally paralyzed by fear or concerning about whether you will live to see the next day in the daily life that you will live should you stay on side negative. But even if you can't excuse yourself, like maybe you get flapped, but you still have the unique experience of you being a top judge with that kind of reputation. So it's clearly on the more utilitarian side, but I think it's still valid that therefore you are still going to have demand by courts at home that you will still be equally compensated, if not greater. So obviously there is still something that can be done on your home country. But then Neg says, personal fulfillment, but that does not engage with the material about proximate concerns, that you have worked there as a judge for a significant amount of time. We flip this by saying that all the more is it justifiable for you to resign because you are well informed that you know there will be a huge shift now because of the national security law. So obviously that doesn't fly. But then the overall weighing is that if the best case of Neg is that you stay because you feel beholden to bettering the situation, and HK doesn't fly because the comparative is better, because even if you want to stay, you will feel more compelled to care about what will happen to you and your family and other proximate concerns. This is an after motion. You can be selfish. Second discussion real quick. Are you able to enact significant change? From affirmative, we posited that you are unable to do so. And we prove this by saying that fear impedes your judgment significantly. So this alone proves that the decisions you make will be affected from here on out. This is debate winning because it is able to stand regardless if there are protections or not, regardless if China is being overbearing upon you, etc., etc. Because this is true as a function of the human psyche that they are not able to disprove. In the very best case of Neg, where you stay and have immense protection, the fear and the pressure that you feel because of the knowledge that there's a potential threat does not go away. So temporarily, you're already compromised, and that's not something that you can solve on Neg. Also, there is no assurance of change happening coming from them at all. So you are just one judge on the panel of multiple judges. But also, Chinese imposition trumps all. In the best case that all judges decide on the most progressive ruling, it's not going to be like suddenly going to be, the actual ruling, because the CCP will laugh and say, aha, not so fast. So they can literally overturn it. So there's no assurance of change. But then they say, at least you can make small incremental changes. But the way from second half beats this, because number one, the only cases that you can do are ones that are insignificant. But two, even if you have a number of cases done on their side, compared to the hundreds of other protesters you can protect, like it just feels bad relatively. But then next says that the judge will not have an impact in Hong Kong. But I think that is only engaging with the material about how the level of change you're even able to enact is minimal. So it is not indispensable. You can still be replaced. So there is still going to be a level of change that will still happen in Hong Kong. Like there is still a lot of panel of judges that are foreign in that. There is still the comparative that there is more room for a replacement judge who is going to be more informed. So you're able to make better decisions. So overall, like you're just going to be much more selfish and much more care about the proximate concerns coming from side affirmative, all of which will not necessarily manifest on side neg.
To very good. Yes, now to conclude the debate, I'd like to welcome the affirmative reply speaker.
Right. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. In response to our case, third negative says, it is extreme. The CCP can do whatever they want. CCP is God Almighty. It is sad, but it is true. The truth is, they now have precedents from overturning something that they previously, as they say, has not been done. Not rarely, right? The truth is, they now have the security law. So negative can say China has always been like this, and the new law isn't significant, but we did explain what it meant. It meant increased freedom to censor. It meant increased ability for China to crack down. So they can explain why the extent isn't significant, even at their best. You can't deny that the extent exists, and therefore our harms still apply on the comparative. A few things in the speech. Firstly, on reputation. Secondly, where do you help Hong Kong? And then lastly, where do you help yourself? Firstly, reputation. So the broad claim is you were seen as spineless. We dealt with this in a number of ways. One, that people are likely to be more empathetic for 2 reasons. The first reason, which they don't respond to, is it's not an isolated experience, right? other foreign judges resigned. So whatever, right? Like people can't, people, it's not like they're gonna completely blame you. It is a fact that they understand that this is a normal occurrence now because other foreign judges resign. Secondly, people aren't stupid. China is globally known as a bully. So third negative can like lie to themselves that they don't think China is scary. If you're faced against Xi Jinping, I'm sure you'll be scared too. Secondly, it eventually dies down because of the media cycle. Thirdly, it's unlikely to affect work prospects. You are a top judge. You have big reputation. You have more experiences that outline you as a significant candidate for other things. But fourthly, even if it still persists, the weighing here is that it's proximate concerns that trump reputational concerns. So even if you opted into this risk, the new context is an excuse for you. So obviously reputation is better under our side, or at least symmetric in this debate, and therefore they cannot win on this point. Secondly, word help Hong Kong. That's important because everything that they said, which is you don't want to throw away your work, you are helping people who are more vulnerable, are dependent on you not being able to help Hong Kong on our side of the house or you helping Hong Kong on their side of the house. At best, helping vulnerable people still exists, right? Because there are other foreign judges on the panel. You have a replacement by a more informed judge, etc. But we said a few things to deal with this. One, that you're unlikely to make change for the plethora of reasons we say. Secondly, that it's unlikely for your decisions to have any effect. The third neg response is it's only on rare occasions. But this is before the national security law, right? We must work under the current context. There is reason to believe that overturning will increase because China is now doubling down. And therefore, you have reasons to believe as well that China has so much friction. But even if you can make change, we just say it's better under our side because it's more likely that the judge who replaces you can make even more change because they didn't enter before the law was passed. This is info that they have, which you didn't before, or it's just the fact that they have a clearer head than you. Why do you then feel better about the kind of change in affirmative? One, something is better than nothing. So when they say you feel like you're doing something, we flip this. We say that whatever you do is likely insignificant and will not help the democracy in Hong Kong because whatever significant ruling you do will be overturned. Because the only uncomparative response that they give is, oh, but they only do it rarely. The frequency of actually significant rulings is rare, right? So obviously it falls on their side of the house. But lastly, it's cognitive dissonance. Third neg says judges want to have a good legacy and be historical. Why doesn't this fly? Aside from the fact that they need to prove that you significantly lose your reputation, which they don't, they need to explain why that hasn't yet been reached. I.e. the fact that you're already the top judge. I.e. the fact that you've already been appointed as a judge in the CFA. So obviously, it's unclear to me as why that's exclusive. Lastly, where do you help yourself? And I like to note that we win this from first, right, in terms of safety, because even at the negative reply best, right, even if none of these harms actually happen, and we agree that they might not, it is the fear that they would happen, right? They don't actually need to kill you. It's that they threaten you with death. It's that they intimidate you to make a certain decision, which leaves you staying up awake at night, wondering if you're going to be kidnapped, wondering if your kids are going to be kidnapped, wondering if your colleagues are going to be hurt. We said that CCP can threaten you. Even if it's not physically, it is emotionally deteriorating. And this stands because this affects your decision-making capabilities. This stands because it is a function of the human psyche. It can't be helped. It can be irrational regardless if Neg says that judges should be strong characters. And at the end of the day, you are a human first and a judge second. They just say you have protections because of clout in your country. We point out that even if they do, that those protections only protect your physical safety, and this is them at their best. They can intimidate you, make you fear for your life, which is incredibly damaging, no matter how unlikely the actual violence is. This stands independently. And I'd like to note, regardless of what happens, at the very least, you see that you're making an impact in your home country. At the very least, you are free to practice the law that you've been raised up in, to practice and defend the people who are the most vulnerable. And that's why we're very proud to affirm and with the ground.